The desert wind howled through the jagged red rocks of the Arizona Territory, carrying with it the sting of sand and the promise of another merciless day. Sarah Mitchell pressed a worn handkerchief to her face, shielding herself from the dust devils that danced across the vast expanse of sagebrush and stone. The October sun hung low in the sky, painting the mesas in shades of copper and blood. She shifted uncomfortably on the hard wooden seat of her wagon, the reins cutting into her palms through her thin gloves. Everything she owned in the world swayed precariously in the bed behind her. A trunk of clothing, her mother's china wrapped in quilts, a few books, and the daguerreotype of Thomas she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her husband's face stared up at her from the silver plate whenever she dared to look, frozen forever in that stern expression he'd worn to the photographer's studio in Tucson just 6 months before his death. The town of Willow Creek had grown smaller behind her throughout the morning. Until now, it was nothing more than a dark smudge against the horizon. Sarah didn't turn to look back. There was nothing there for her now but suspicious glares and whispered accusations. The good Christian women of Willow Creek had made their position clear enough when they'd stood in clusters outside the general store, their voices carrying clearly to where she'd loaded her supplies. "Cursed! Old Mrs." Henderson had hissed, clutching her shawl despite the heat. "First her parents, then that husband of hers. Mark my words, death follows that woman like a shadow." Sarah had kept her head high, her jaw set as she'd climbed aboard her wagon. Let them talk. They'd been happy enough to accept her husband's surveying skills when he'd mapped out their property lines and water rights. But when Thomas had challenged Samuel Morrison's claim to Sweetwater Valley and ended up shot dead for his troubles, those same neighbors had suddenly found her presence unsettling. The fact that Morrison had been acquitted by a jury of his peers, all of whom owed him money or favors, had sealed her fate in their eyes. She was the widow of a troublemaker, and worse, a woman alone with no family to claim her. The trail ahead stretched endlessly through a landscape that seemed carved from the very bones of the earth. Massive buttes rose like ancient sentinels, their stratified layers telling stories of floods and fires from eons past. Occasional Joshua trees thrust their twisted arms skyward, and barrel cacti squatted like green toads among the rocks. It was beautiful in its desolation, terrible in its indifference to human suffering. Sarah had hoped to reach Fort Defiance by nightfall, but the mule was showing signs of lameness, favoring his right front leg. She'd have to stop soon to check his hoof for stones. The thought of camping alone in this wilderness sent a shiver down her spine despite the heat. She'd heard the stories, Apache raids, bandits, mountain lions, but what choice did she have? The boarding house in town had refused her continued residence, and she had no kin to take her in. The sun was beginning its descent when she spotted the dust cloud. At first, she thought it might be a whirlwind, one of those desert phantoms that appeared and vanished without warning. But as it drew closer, her heart began to pound. Riders, at least 6 of them, coming fast from the north. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the Spencer rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot. She'd only ever used it on rabbits and the occasional coyote, but she loaded it now with shaking fingers, praying she wouldn't need it. Perhaps they were cavalry from the fort, or honest travelers like herself. But as the riders crested a low rise, her hope died. These were no soldiers. Their clothes were a motley collection of worn leather and faded cloth, their faces obscured by bandanas, border ruffians, the kind who preyed on travelers and lonely homesteads, taking what they wanted and leaving only grief in their wake. The leader, a man with pale eyes and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, raised a hand to halt his companions. They spread out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. Well, the scarred man called out, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "What have we here? A lady traveling all alone? That ain't safe. Ma'am, not safe at all." Sarah raised the rifle, trying to keep it steady despite the tremor in her arms. "Stay back. I'm armed, and I know how to use this." The men laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the rocks. "Hear that, boys? The little dove has claws." The leader walked his horse closer, seemingly unconcerned by the weapon pointed at his chest. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here without a man to protect her?" That's none of your concern. Let me pass. Now that ain't neighborly." His eyes traveled over her wagon, taking inventory. "Looks like you're carrying quite a load. We'd be happy to lighten it for you." One of the other men, younger with stringy brown hair, had circled around to the side. "She's got a trunk back here. Jake, probably full of pretties." Sarah swung the rifle toward him, then back to Jake, realizing the futility of trying to cover them all. Her mule, sensing danger, began to stamp and pull against his harness. "Please," she said, hating the tremor that crept into her voice. "I'm a widow. This is all I have in the world." "A widow?" Jake's grin widened. "Well, that explains the traveling alone. Recent, is it? You still wearing mourning clothes and all?" The black dress seemed to burn against her skin. She'd worn it as armor against the town's judgment, but now it marked her as vulnerable prey. The attack came swiftly. While she was focused on Jake, one of the men rushed from her blind side. The rifle went off, the shot going wild into the sky as rough hands grabbed her arms. Sarah fought with desperate strength, kicking and clawing, but there were too many of them. They dragged her from the wagon seat, her boots scrabbling for purchase in the dust. "Check the trunk," Jake ordered. "And that box under the seat might be cash money hidden away." Sarah twisted in her captor's grip, watching helplessly as they ransacked her belongings. Her mother's china shattered on the rocks, the quilts her grandmother had stitched torn open in search of hidden valuables. When they found Thomas's watch and the small leather pouch containing her savings, $43 meant to start a new life. Jake pocketed them with satisfaction. "Not a bad haul," he said, then turned his attention back to her. "Question is, what do we do with you?" The younger man licked his lips. "She's right pretty under all that dust." "No." Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please, no." Jake studied her with those cold eyes, and for a moment she thought she saw something like pity flicker across his face. Then it was gone. "Tie her up," he ordered. "We'll take her with us. Might be someone will pay ransom for a widow lady. If not—" He shrugged, the gesture more terrifying than any threat. They bound her hands with rawhide that cut into her wrists and threw her across one of their saddles like a sack of grain. The world bounced and blurred as they rode hard away from the trail, heading into a maze of canyons and arroyos that seemed to swallow them whole. Sarah's ribs ached with each jolting step, and she tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. After what felt like hours, they stopped in a narrow canyon where ancient cottonwoods grew beside a trickling stream. The men made camp with practiced efficiency, building a fire and passing around a bottle of whiskey. Sarah lay where they'd dumped her, her body one massive bruise, trying to work feeling back into her numb hands. "Should post a watch," one of the men suggested. "Them Apache been active in these parts." Jake scoffed. "Apache don't come into Dead Horse Canyon. Too many spirits here, they say." He took a long pull from the bottle. "Besides, we'll be gone come first light." As darkness fell and the men grew drunk and careless, Sarah began working at her bonds. The rawhide had loosened slightly from her sweat and blood. If she could just get free, perhaps she could slip away into the darkness. The desert that had seemed so hostile now offered the promise of escape. She'd managed to work one hand partially free when a sound made everyone freeze, the call of an owl, but somehow wrong, too deliberate. Jake lunged for his gun, but he was too slow, too drunk. The arrow took him in the throat, cutting off his shout before it could begin. More arrows whispered from the darkness, finding their marks with deadly precision. The bandits scrambled for cover, firing wildly into the night, but their attackers were shadows among shadows. Sarah pressed herself against the ground, making herself as small as possible as the battle raged around her. A man fell across her legs, his weight pinning her down, his blood soaking through her dress. She bit back a scream, knowing that any sound might draw attention she couldn't afford. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the fighting stopped. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the gentle murmur of the stream. Sarah lay perfectly still, afraid to breathe. As footsteps approached, moccasined feet stopped beside her, and strong hands rolled the dead man off her legs. She looked up into a face painted for war, dark eyes reflecting the firelight like a wolf's. An Apache warrior, his expression unreadable as stone. He studied her for a long moment, her bound hands, her torn dress, the bruises already forming on her arms. Then he spoke, his voice low and harsh, in accented English. "White woman, you are prisoner of these men?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. He drew a knife from his belt, and she flinched, but he only cut her bonds. As circulation returned to her hands in painful tingles, she watched him survey the carnage around them. His warriors, she could see them now, moving among the bodies, were efficiently gathering weapons and anything else of value. The Apache looked back at her, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not kindness exactly, but a kind of bitter understanding. "These men are dead. You are free to go." Sarah struggled to sit up, her legs too weak to stand. Where would she go? Her wagon was miles away, probably picked clean by now. She had no food, no water, no weapon. The desert would kill her as surely as these bandits might have. Unless, the warrior continued, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. "You are enemy of my people. Are you settler? Come to steal Apache land?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "I'm nobody, just a widow trying to get to Fort Defiance. I have no quarrel with your people." He laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "All whites have quarrel with Apache. Your people burn our villages, kill our families." His hand moved to a leather pouch at his belt, and she glimpsed what might have been a child's toy inside. "My wife, my small daughter, dead by white soldiers' hands not one moon past." The pain in his voice was raw, familiar. Sarah knew that particular anguish, the way grief could hollow you out until you were nothing but an empty shell walking through the days. Without thinking, she said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He stared at her, clearly not expecting sympathy from a white woman. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then one of his warriors called out in Apache, gesturing urgently toward the canyon mouth. "Soldiers come," the warrior translated. "We go." He looked at Sarah once more, seeming to weigh her fate in his hands. "You come with us, or you stay here for soldiers to find with dead white men. Choose quick." Sarah's mind raced. If the cavalry found her here with the slaughtered bandits, would they believe her story? A widow, traveling alone, the only survivor of an Indian attack? Or would they think she'd led these men to their deaths somehow, that she was in league with the Apache? She'd already seen how quickly her neighbors had turned against her. How much quicker would strangers judge her? "I'll come," she heard herself say. The warrior nodded curtly and pulled her to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled, but he steadied her with a grip like iron. "You ride with me, make no sound, no trouble, or I leave you for vultures. Understand?" "I understand," as he lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her. Sarah caught a glimpse of the life she was leaving behind. Thomas's daguerreotype had fallen from one of the bandits' pockets. The silver surface cracked and tarnished. She wanted to reach for it, but the warrior was already turning his mount toward the narrow trail that led deeper into the canyon. The war party moved like ghosts through the darkness, their horses' hooves muffled by centuries of sand. Sarah gripped the horse's mane, acutely aware of the warrior's presence behind her, the heat of his body, the controlled strength in the arm that held her steady, the scent of smoke and leather and something wild. Behind them, she could hear the distant thunder of cavalry horses entering the canyon. Whatever fate awaited her with these Apache warriors, she'd crossed a line from which there could be no return. The widow Mitchell was dead, left behind with the bandits in that blood-soaked canyon. What she would become now, only the unforgiving desert knew. The ride through the darkness seemed endless. Sarah's body ached with each movement of the horse, her ribs protesting where the bandits had handled her roughly. The Apache warrior behind her said nothing, guiding their mount with subtle shifts of his weight and pressure from his knees. Around them, the other warriors moved in silence, navigating the treacherous terrain as if they could see in the dark. They climbed steadily upward, following paths that seemed invisible to Sarah's eyes. The desert gave way to scrub pine and juniper, the air growing cooler as they ascended into the mountains. Stars wheeled overhead, brilliant in the clear sky, but she found no comfort in their beauty. Every shadow could hide danger. Every sound might herald pursuit. Just before dawn, they reached their destination, a narrow canyon hidden deep in the Mogollon Rim, where a small spring fed a grove of cottonwoods. The temporary camp was well concealed, with brush shelters that blended seamlessly into the landscape. A few women and children emerged to greet the returning warriors, their faces turning hard when they saw Sarah. The warrior dismounted and pulled her down after him. Her legs, numb from hours on horseback, buckled beneath her. She would have fallen if he hadn't caught her arm, his grip firm but not cruel. He spoke rapidly in Apache to an older woman who seemed to hold some authority, gesturing toward Sarah as he explained. The woman's eyes were like chips of obsidian, cold and unforgiving. She responded sharply, clearly displeased. Other voices joined in, and Sarah didn't need to understand the words to know they were arguing about her presence. Several of the warriors who'd rescued her or captured her, she wasn't sure which, seemed to be advocating for simply killing her and being done with it. Finally, the warrior who'd brought her raised his voice, silencing the others. He spoke with quiet authority, and gradually the group dispersed, though not without casting dark looks in Sarah's direction. The older woman spat at the ground near Sarah's feet before stalking away. "You live for now," the warrior told her. "But many here lost family to white soldiers. They want your blood for payment." "I've never hurt anyone," Sarah protested. "I'm not a soldier. White is white," he said flatly. Then, studying her more closely in the growing light, he added, "You are weak, need food, water, rest. Come." He led her to a small shelter at the edge of the camp, little more than a framework of bent saplings covered with brush and blankets. Inside was a buffalo robe and a water gourd. He gestured for her to sit, then brought her a handful of dried meat and some kind of flat bread. Sarah ate mechanically, too exhausted to taste the food. The warrior crouched nearby, watching her with those unreadable dark eyes. Now that she could see him clearly, she noticed the strong planes of his face, the scar that ran along his left shoulder, the way he held himself with coiled readiness even at rest. He appeared to be in his 30s, with the lean, hard build of a man who lived by strength and skill. "What's your name?" she asked when she'd finished eating. He seemed to consider whether to answer. "I am called Naichi," he said finally. "It means mischief in your tongue. I'm Sarah, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah." He tested the name, his accent giving it an unfamiliar cadence. "You rest now. Tonight, we move again." "Move where?" "Away from soldiers, always away." Bitterness colored his voice. "This is Apache life now. Run, hide, fight, run again." He left her then, posting himself outside the shelter like a guard, or a jailer. Sarah lay down on the buffalo robe, every muscle screaming in protest. Despite her fear and uncertainty, exhaustion pulled her under within moments. She woke to the sound of children playing. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in Willow Creek, listening to the neighbor children in the street. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up too quickly, making her head spin. Outside the shelter, life in the Apache camp continued with careful normalcy. Women tended fires and prepared food, their movements efficient and purposeful. Children ran between the shelters, their laughter a strange counterpoint to the tension she could feel underlying everything. Warriors checked weapons and kept watch on the canyon rim. Naichi appeared with more food and fresh water. "You feel better?" "Yes, thank you." Sarah accepted the offerings gratefully. "Your English is very good. Learned from missionaries when young, before I knew better." His tone suggested this was a source of regret. Also from trading posts, soldiers, enemies. Know your enemy's tongue, know his thoughts. "Is that what I am? Your enemy?" He tilted his head, considering. Not decided yet? As the day wore on, Sarah observed the camp's rhythms. These people were living on the edge of survival, ready to flee at a moment's notice. She saw how the children were trained to go silent at a hand signal, how supplies were kept packed for instant travel, how even during meals, weapons were kept within reach. A young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, crept closer to stare at her. His curiosity overcame caution until he was just a few feet away. Sarah smiled at him, and he smiled back tentatively. Then a woman, his mother, presumably, called sharply, and he scampered away. "That one lost his father last month," Naichi said, having appeared silently beside her. "Soldiers attacked our winter camp, killed 12, including his father, including my—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Your wife and daughter," Sarah said softly. "You mentioned them before." His face went hard as granite. Yellowhair, she was called, for the gold in her brown hair when sun touched it, and Little Moonface, only 4 winters old. They burned. He stopped again, turning away. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't help, but I'm sorry." "You know?" He whirled on her, eyes blazing. "What do you know of loss? White woman. You sit in your safe towns, your wooden houses, while we are hunted like animals. What you know?" "I know my husband was murdered 3 months ago," Sarah said quietly. "Shot in the back over a piece of land that wasn't even ours. I know the man who killed him walked free because he had friends and money. I know what it's like to have everything taken away and be powerless to stop it." Naichi stared at her for a long moment. Some of the anger faded from his expression, replaced by something that might have been recognition. "How he die?" Sarah told him about Thomas, about the surveying work, about Samuel Morrison and the disputed valley. As she spoke, she realized it was the first time she'd been able to tell the whole story to someone who might actually understand the injustice of it. "Your law protects the strong, punishes the weak," Naichi said when she finished. "Apache know this well." "It's not my law," Sarah said bitterly. "I have no more voice in it than you do. Less, maybe. At least you can fight back." "Fight?" He laughed harshly. "We fight. They send more soldiers. Kill 1 white. They kill 10 Apache. Take our children to their schools. Cut their hair. Beat them for speaking our words. This is your civilization." As the sun began its descent, the camp prepared to move. Sarah watched the systematic breakdown of the shelters, the careful erasure of any sign they'd been there. These people had turned impermanence into an art form, leaving no trace for enemies to follow. "You ride with me again," Naichi told her. "We go to deeper mountains, harder for soldiers to follow." "For how long?" Sarah asked. "What's going to happen to me?" He shrugged. "That is not for me alone to decide. Some say kill you, take revenge for our dead. Some say trade you back to whites for food, blankets, ammunition. Some say keep you a slave, make you work like Apache women made to work in white houses. And what do you say?" He didn't answer immediately, busy with checking his horse's hooves. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I think maybe you are like small bird blown off course by storm. Not your fault where wind takes you, but others not see it same way." They traveled through the night again, climbing ever higher into mountains where the air was thin and cold. Sarah huddled against Naichi's chest, no longer concerned about propriety. Survival had a way of stripping away such civilized concerns. His warmth kept the worst of the mountain chill at bay, and she found herself oddly comforted by his solid presence. Near dawn, they stopped to rest the horses at a high meadow where patches of snow still lingered in the shadows. The sunrise painted the peaks in shades of rose and gold, achingly beautiful. Sarah had never been this high in the mountains, never seen the world spread out below like a map. "Your land is beautiful," she said without thinking. "Was our land," Naichi corrected. "Now, we are only ghosts here, haunting what was taken." Throughout the day's ride, he began to point out things, edible plants, water signs, how to read the weather in cloud formations. Sarah wasn't sure if he was simply passing time or actually teaching her survival skills. Either way, She listened intently, understanding that knowledge might mean the difference between life and death in this unforgiving landscape. When they finally reached the new camp location, a hidden valley with good water and natural defensive positions, Sarah could barely stand. Naichi helped her to another brush shelter, this one more substantial than the last. The band would stay here for several days, he explained, unless soldiers were spotted. That night, as she lay on her buffalo robe listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Apache camp, Sarah reflected on the strangeness of her situation. 2 days ago, she'd been a respectable widow, albeit one forced from her home. Now she was, what, a captive, a guest, something in between? She thought about Naichi's words. A small bird blown off course by storm. It was apartment. She'd had no control over the winds that had brought her here. From Thomas's death to the town's rejection to the bandits' attack, each event had pushed her further from the life she'd known until she'd ended up here, in a world as foreign to her as the moon. But perhaps that wasn't entirely bad. In Willow Creek, she'd been slowly suffocating under the weight of others' expectations and judgments. Here, strangely, despite being a captive among enemies, she felt more alive than she had in months. The constant danger kept her senses sharp, and the Apache's struggle for survival resonated with something deep in her own spirit. A sound outside made her tense, but it was only Naichi checking on her. He entered the shelter and crouched beside her, offering a cup of some kind of herbal tea. "Drink. Will help with soreness from riding." Sarah sipped the bitter liquid, making a face that almost made him smile. "Thank you, for everything. I know I'm a burden to your people." Burden, maybe, but also... He paused, seeming to search for words. "You remind me that not all whites are same, just as not all Apache are same. This is uncomfortable knowing." "Why uncomfortable?" "Easier to hate when enemy has no face, no story. You have face, you have story. Makes things complicated." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then Sarah asked, "Will you tell me about them? Your wife and daughter?" Pain flashed across his features, but then, slowly, he began to speak. He told her about Yellowhair's laughter, how she could track a deer better than most warriors, about Little Moonface's first words, her favorite doll made of corn husks, how she would climb into his lap and demand stories. As he spoke, Sarah saw the man beneath the warrior, a husband and father destroyed by loss, clinging to vengeance because it was all he had left. She understood that feeling too well. How many nights had she lain awake imagining Samuel Morrison meeting justice at her hands? When he finished, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and touched his hand. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "They live on in your memories," she said softly. "No one can take that from you." "Memories," he repeated bitterly. "Memories don't keep you warm in winter. Don't laugh at your jokes. Don't grow up to have children of their own." "No," Sarah agreed. "They don't, but they're all we have sometimes." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. His hand turned under hers, fingers briefly interlacing before he pulled away and stood. "Rest now," he said gruffly. "Tomorrow, the council meets to decide your fate." As he left, Sarah touched her hand where his had been, feeling the lingering warmth. She was playing with fire. She knew. Whatever strange connection was forming between them could only lead to disaster. She was a white woman. He was an Apache warrior. Their peoples were at war. There could be no bridge across that chasm. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep, she found herself thinking not of escape or rescue, but of the pain in his voice when he spoke of his family, the gentle way he'd tended to her needs, the brief moment when their hands had touched and the world had seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Outside, she could hear him settling himself near her shelter, standing guard over the enemy who was becoming something else entirely, something dangerous, something that made her forget who she was supposed to be and remember only who she was. The council met at dawn, faces painted with ceremonial designs that made them look fierce in the early light. Sarah watched from her shelter as the leaders gathered around the central fire. their voices rising and falling in heated debate. Though she couldn't understand the words, she could read the gestures, the pointed looks in her direction, the way hands moved to knife hilts when passions ran high. Naichi stood among them, speaking forcefully, his whole body tense with the effort of persuasion. Several times, older warriors interrupted him, their tones dismissive. The woman who'd spat at Sarah's feet on the first day seemed particularly vehement, gesturing wildly as she spoke. "They argue about you," a voice said in English. Sarah turned to find a young Apache woman standing nearby, perhaps 20 years old, with intelligent eyes that held less hostility than most. "You speak English?" "Little, from mission school." The woman's mouth twisted with distaste at the memory. "They call me Maria there. My real name is Itza. What are they saying about me?" Itza listened for a moment. "Some say kill you, say your people killed too many Apache, must have blood for blood. Old woman, Alma. She lost 3 sons to white soldiers. She says keeping you brings curse." Sarah's heart sank. "And Naichi, he speaks for your life, says you are not enemy. Just woman caught in war not of your making. Says..." She paused, frowning as she translated. "Says Apache not like whites, not kill innocent ones, but others say no white is innocent." The debate raged for over an hour. Finally, an elderly man Sarah hadn't seen before raised his hand for silence. He spoke quietly, but everyone listened with obvious respect. "Who is he?" Sarah whispered. "Dakea, war chief. Very wise, very fierce. Even soldiers fear him." Itza tilted her head, listening. "He says, test, yes, test. You must prove you can live as Apache. Work as Apache. If you weak, useless, then..." She made a cutting gesture across her throat. Sarah swallowed hard. What kind of test? But Itza had melted away as several warriors approached. Naichi was with them, his face carefully neutral. "Come," he said. "You must learn." They led her to where the women were working, processing the meat from a recent hunt. The older woman, Alma, thrust a knife at Sarah and pointed to a partially butchered deer carcass. The message was clear: work or die. Sarah had dressed chickens and rabbits back in Willow Creek, but this was different. The deer was large, the work hard and bloody. Her soft hands, used to needlework and baking, quickly developed blisters. When she gagged at the smell of entrails, the women laughed mockingly. Alma showed her the correct cuts with sharp, impatient gestures, cuffing her when she made mistakes. Sarah's dress, already torn and stained, became sodden with blood. Her back ached from bending. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She could feel eyes on her, watching for weakness. As the sun climbed higher, they moved on to other tasks, scraping hides with sharp stones until her fingers bled, gathering wood from increasingly distant locations as the easy pickings near camp were exhausted, hauling water from the stream in heavy clay pots that made her shoulders scream. The Apache women worked alongside her, their movements efficient and practiced. They chatted among themselves, occasionally laughing at Sarah's clumsy attempts. Only Itza showed any kindness, quietly demonstrating better techniques when the others weren't watching. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked during a brief rest. Itza shrugged. "I remember being outsider, at mission school, white children cruel to Apache girl. Here, Apache women cruel to white woman. Same thing, different side." By afternoon, Sarah could barely stand. Her hands were raw, her dress hung in tatters, and every muscle felt like it had been beaten with clubs when she dropped a water pot, shattering it on the rocks. Alma flew into a rage, berating her in rapid Apache. Naichi appeared as if from nowhere, speaking sharply to Alma. The old woman argued back, but he stood firm. Finally, she stalked away, muttering what were clearly curses. "You do well for first day," he told Sarah, though his eyes said differently. She looked like exactly what she was, a town woman trying to do work that Apache girls learned from childhood. "Come, you need medicine for hands." He led her back to her shelter and returned with a gourd of something that smelled of pine resin. "Give me your hands." Sarah extended them reluctantly, ashamed of how they trembled. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he applied the salve to her blisters and cuts. The medicine stung at first, then brought cooling relief. "This is impossible," she said, fighting back tears of exhaustion and frustration. "I can't do what your women do. I wasn't raised to it." "No, but you try. That matters." He continued working on her hands, his focus complete. Apache children learn these skills from small age. You learn as adult, much harder, but you don't quit. "This also matters. Will they really kill me if I fail?" He was quiet for a moment. "Some would, but I hope, most see you try hard. Maybe have mercy. Apache respect courage, even in enemy." "Is that still what I am to you?" "Enemy." His hand stilled on hers. When he looked up, their faces were very close. "I don't know anymore what you are," he admitted. "This is problem." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then voices outside broke the spell, and he pulled away, leaving the medicine pot with her. That night, despite her exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt, but worse was the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more of the same. How long could she endure this? How long before her body simply gave out? She must have dozed eventually because she woke to find someone in her shelter. Panic flared until she recognized Naichi's silhouette in the moonlight. "Shh," he whispered. "Come. I show you something." Too tired to argue, she followed him out of camp, up a narrow trail to a ledge overlooking the valley. The moon was full, turning the landscape into a silver dreamscape. He sat on a flat rock and gestured for her to join him. "When I cannot sleep, I come here," he said. "Look at land. Remember why we fight." Sarah sank down beside him, grateful to be off her feet. "It's beautiful. My father brought me here first time when I was boy. Said, 'This is your home. Every rock, every tree, every drop of water. Learn it, love it, protect it.'" His voice grew sad. "Now I bring no son here. No one to pass the knowledge to. You could marry again, have more children." He shook his head. "Heart is buried with yellow hair. No room for another." They sat in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the desert surrounding them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another. "Why did you bring me here?" Sarah asked eventually. "To show you why we live as we do. Why work is so hard. Everything we need comes from land, food, shelter, medicine, tools. Apache woman must know how to find it all. Make it all, not for comfort, but for survival." "I understand that, but understanding doesn't make my hands tougher or my back stronger." He turned to study her in the moonlight. "You stronger than you know. Today proved this. Today nearly killed me. But didn't. You still here, still fighting." He paused, then added quietly, "You remind me of yellow hair when I first courted her. She was stubborn too." The comparison to his dead wife should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it wasn't. Sarah could hear the affection in his voice, the memory of happier times. "Tell me about your husband," he said unexpectedly. "What kind of man was he?" Sarah found herself talking about Thomas, his dedication to fairness, his meticulous surveys, his dry humor that could make her laugh even on hard days. She told Naichi about their small house in Willow Creek, the garden she'd tended, the quilts she'd made for the bed they'd shared. "He sounds like good man," Naichi said when she finished. "Foolish to challenge powerful enemy, but good. He believed in justice, in doing what was right, even when it was dangerous." Sarah pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly cold despite the mild night. "I used to think that made him noble. Now I think it just made him dead. Better to die with honor than live as coward." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one left behind to pick up the pieces." He was quiet for a long moment. "No, not easy for me to say. I am also one left behind." Sarah turned to look at him, seeing her own grief reflected in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. This time, he didn't flinch away. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean—" "I know." His hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "We are both walking wounded. You and I. Perhaps this is why—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Sarah felt it too. This strange connection forged from shared loss and unlikely understanding. It should have frightened her, but instead, she found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something stronger than reason. An owl hooted nearby, breaking the moment. Naichi stood abruptly, pulling her to her feet. "We should return. If others find you gone, we'll think you try to escape." On the walk back, he pointed out night-blooming plants and showed her how to find direction by the stars. Always teaching. She realized, trying to give her the tools to survive even as others plotted her death. At her shelter, he paused. "Tomorrow will be hard again. But each day gets easier. Body learns, grows strong. Spirit too. What if it doesn't? What if I fail?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she thought she saw something like fear flicker across his features. "Then I will speak for you again, and again, until they listen or—" He didn't finish. "Or, sleep now. Tomorrow comes soon enough." But as she lay on her buffalo robe, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what he hadn't said. Until they listen. Or what? Until they killed her anyway? Until he was cast out for defending an enemy. The next days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and pain. Each morning brought new challenges. Learning to tan hides properly, grinding corn with stone tools, weaving baskets from willow branches. Her hands toughened slowly, developing calluses where blisters had been. Her muscles, pushed beyond their limits daily, began to adapt. Itza became her secret ally, offering advice and occasionally helping when tasks proved too difficult. Through her, Sarah began to understand some Apache words, basic phrases that helped her follow instructions better. "Why does Naichi defend me?" Sarah asked one day as they gathered piñon nuts. Itza gave her a knowing look. "You not see? He looks at you like starving man looks at feast, but also like man afraid to eat, afraid food might be poisoned. That's ridiculous. I'm white, his enemy. Heart doesn't care about color of skin. Heart wants what it wants." Itza shrugged. "But yes, his problem. Big problem. Some already whisper he grows too soft, forgets his duty to people." That night, Sarah noticed the truth in Itza's words. The way other warriors looked at Naichi with suspicion. The conversations that stopped when he approached. He was paying a price for protecting her, and she hadn't even realized it. She was grinding acorns when the hunting party returned with grim news. Soldiers had been spotted 2 valleys over, heading in their direction. The camp would have to move again, immediately. As everyone scrambled to pack, Alma confronted Sarah, speaking rapidly in Apache and gesturing threateningly. Naichi appeared and intervened. But this time Alma didn't back down. She called out to others, and soon a crowd had gathered. Dakia, the war chief, raised his hand for silence. He spoke quietly to Naichi, who translated for Sarah. "He says you bring bad luck. Soldiers follow you. Maybe some want to leave you behind for soldiers to find. Slow them down." Sarah's blood ran cold. Being left for the cavalry might seem like rescue, but she knew better. A white woman found living with Apaches would be considered ruined, violated. The questions would be brutal, the assumptions worse, and that was if they believed she hadn't gone willingly. "Tell him I can keep up," she said desperately. "I've learned to work. I can learn to travel too." Naichi translated, but Dakia looked skeptical. He posed a question. "He asks if you can walk all night through mountains. No rest, no complaint. Says if you slow us down, he will cut your throat himself." Sarah lifted her chin. "I can do it." She almost believed it herself. But as they set out into the gathering dusk, moving at a pace that made her previous travels seem leisurely, she wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant. The Apache moved like shadows through terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and shred skin. Within an hour, she was struggling. Within 2, every breath was agony. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, driven by sheer will and the knowledge that to stop was to die. Naichi stayed close, occasionally steadying her when she stumbled. Once, when they paused for a few moments to let the horses drink, he pressed a water gourd into her hands. "You do well," he murmured. "Be strong, not much farther." It was a lie, and they both knew it. They would walk all night and into the next day if necessary. But his faith helped her find reserves she didn't know existed. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of fire, the band finally stopped in a sheltered canyon. Sarah collapsed where she stood, her legs refusing to hold her another moment. Around her, the Apache efficiently made camp, seemingly unaffected by the brutal march. Naichi knelt beside her with water and pemmican. "You did it. Even some warriors complain less than you on that trail." She was too exhausted to respond, barely able to chew the dried meat he placed in her mouth. As consciousness faded, she felt him lift her, carrying her to a hastily erected shelter. His arms were strong and safe, and she let herself rest against his chest, no longer caring who might see or what they might think. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her determination to survive, but for now, she had earned another day of life, another chance to prove she could adapt, could become whatever she needed to be to survive in this harsh new world. And maybe, just maybe, another day to understand why an Apache warrior risked everything to protect a white widow who should have been his enemy, and why she was beginning to hope he would never stop. The cavalry found them 3 days later. Sarah was gathering medicinal plants with Itza when the first shots rang out. The peaceful morning exploded into chaos as soldiers poured down from the ridge above, their blue uniforms stark against the red rocks. Apache warriors scrambled for weapons, while women grabbed children and ran for cover. "This way!" Itza pulled Sarah toward a cluster of boulders, but they'd barely taken 10 steps when a soldier on horseback cut off their escape. His rifle swung toward them, and Sarah saw death in the young man's frightened eyes. Naichi appeared from nowhere, his war lance taking the soldier in the shoulder, knocking him from his mount. "Run!" he shouted, turning to face 3 more soldiers charging their position. Sarah ran, Itza beside her, dodging between rocks as bullets whined overhead. The narrow canyon that had sheltered them now became a death trap, echoing with gunfire and screams. She saw Dakea fall, clutching his chest, saw Alma trying to shield a group of children with her own body. They reached a crevice in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for one person. Itza pushed Sarah inside, then squeezed in after her. They pressed back into the darkness, hearts hammering, as the battle raged outside. Through the narrow opening, Sarah caught glimpses of the fighting. The Apache were outnumbered 3-1, but they knew the terrain and fought with desperate fury. She searched for Naichi among the warriors, finally spotting him near the canyon mouth, his rifle speaking death to any soldier who tried to advance. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. A soldier was creeping along the rim above Naichi's position, rifle aimed downward. Naichi couldn't see him, focused on the enemies in front. Without thinking, Sarah burst from the crevice. She snatched up a fallen warrior's bow, knocked an arrow with trembling fingers, and let fly. Her months of practice paid off. The arrow struck the soldier's arm, spoiling his shot. He screamed and fell backward, disappearing from view. Naichi spun at the sound, saw her exposed in the open, and his face contorted with fear and fury. "Get back!" he roared, but it was too late. A cavalry officer, his uniform marked with captain's bars, had seen her. More importantly, he'd seen her shoot one of his men. His face twisted with rage as he spurred his horse toward her. "Apache-loving whore!" he snarled, raising his saber. Sarah dove aside, the blade whistling past her ear. She rolled, came up running, but the horseman wheeled expertly, cutting off her retreat. This time she wouldn't be able to dodge. The gunshot was impossibly loud. The captain jerked, eyes widening in surprise, then toppled from his horse. Behind him, Naichi lowered his smoking rifle, his face a mask of controlled violence. But killing an officer brought swift retribution. A squad of soldiers concentrated their fire on Naichi's position. forcing him to take cover. More troops poured into the canyon, and Sarah realized with sinking heart that the battle was lost. "Surrender!" a sergeant's voice boomed across the canyon. "Throw down your weapons and surrender, or we'll kill every last one of you." For a moment, the gunfire slowed. Sarah could see the Apache warriors looking to Dakia, but the war chief lay unmoving in a spreading pool of blood. The decision fell to the surviving leaders, and she could read the agonizing choice in their faces: fight to the death or surrender and face imprisonment, possibly execution. It was Naichi who made the choice. He stood slowly, tossing his rifle aside, and raised his hands. One by one, other warriors followed suit, though their faces showed they'd rather die fighting. The soldiers advanced cautiously, weapons trained on the surrendering Apache. They kicked the warriors to their knees, binding their hands with a rough efficiency. The women and children were herded into a frightened group, some weeping over fallen family members. Sarah tried to blend in with the Apache women, but her pale skin betrayed her instantly. A sergeant grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Well, what have we here?" His eyes traveled over her blood-stained dress, her sun-darkened face, her work-roughened hands. "You Mrs. Mitchell? The widow from Willow Creek?" She nodded mutely. "There's been search parties out for weeks. Ma'am, your wagon was found burned. Thought you were dead for sure." His grip tightened painfully. "How long you been with these savages?" Before she could answer, he'd seen the bow still clutched in her hand. His face darkened. "Was that you shooting at my men? By God, if you've gone native, leave her alone." Naichi had spoken in English, his voice cutting through the sergeant's tirade. Even bound and on his knees, he radiated dangerous authority. The sergeant released Sarah and backhanded Naichi viciously. "Shut your mouth, savage!" He turned to his men. "Tie this one extra tight. He killed Captain Morrison." Sarah's heart sank at the name. Morrison. Related to Samuel Morrison. Her husband's killer? The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. They were marched out of the canyon in a miserable procession. The dead were left behind, Apache and soldier alike, for burial details to handle later. Sarah counted 7 Apache warriors killed, including Dakia, and at least a dozen wounded. 3 women and 2 children had also fallen in the crossfire. She wasn't bound like the others, but soldiers flanked her closely, rifles ready. When she stumbled, exhausted and heartsick, they prodded her forward with gun butts. She could feel Naichi's eyes on her, but didn't dare look back. The forced march lasted 2 days. The Apache prisoners were given minimal water, no food. Sarah tried to share her meager rations with the children, but the soldiers stopped her. "They're animals, ma'am," one young private told her, not unkindly. "Don't waste your pity. They're people," she said quietly. "Hungry, frightened people." He looked uncomfortable, but said nothing more. They reached Fort Defiance as the sun set on the second day. The sight of the wooden palisades and flags snapping in the evening breeze should have meant safety to Sarah. Instead, it filled her with dread. She knew what came next. Questions, accusations, assumptions about what had happened to her among the Apache. The warriors were immediately separated from the women and children, dragged toward the guardhouse. Sarah watched helplessly as Naichi was shoved inside, catching one last glimpse of his face before the heavy door slammed shut. She was taken to the commander's office, where Colonel James Patterson waited. He was a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier violence. He gestured for her to sit, pouring water from a pitcher. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, his voice professionally kind. "I'm sure your ordeal has been terrible, but I need to know everything that happened from the moment you were taken." Sarah sipped the water, buying time to think. How could she explain that she hadn't been taken so much as saved? That her captors had become protectors, teachers, perhaps even friends? That one of them, "They killed the bandits who attacked me," she said finally. "Then they took me with them." "Did they—" Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Did they violate you in any way?" There it was. The question she'd known was coming. The only thing that seemed to matter to these men, not whether she'd been hurt or starved or forced to work, but whether she'd been ruined in their eyes. No, she said firmly. They did not. He looked skeptical. You were with them for weeks. Mrs. Mitchell, you're telling me that none of those bucks— I'm telling you the truth, Colonel. She met his gaze steadily. They made me work. Yes, hard labor like their own women do, but they didn't violate me. I see. He made notes on a paper before him. And yet, you were seen firing a weapon at my men. Care to explain that? Sarah lifted her chin. A soldier was about to shoot someone in the back. I stopped him. Someone? You mean one of the Apache warriors? Yes. Patterson's face hardened. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm trying to help you here, but defending your actions becomes difficult when you openly admit to attacking U.S. Army personnel in defense of hostiles. They weren't hostiles to me, Sarah said quietly. They were people who'd fed me, sheltered me, taught me to survive. What would you have done? Colonel? He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You've been through a terrible ordeal. Stockholm Syndrome. The doctors call it when captives begin to sympathize with their captors. With rest and proper care, you'll recover your senses. My senses are perfectly fine. Are they? Then perhaps you can explain why. When my men found you, you were dressed like a squaw and fighting alongside the Apache. Sarah looked down at herself. The deerskin dress Itza had given her when her own clothing fell apart. The moccasins that had replaced her ruined boots. She supposed she did look like what he accused her of being. I adapted it to survive. She said, Wouldn't you have done the same? Patterson stood, clearly finished with the interview. You'll be housed here at the fort until arrangements can be made for your return to civilization. I strongly suggest you use that time to remember who you are and where your loyalties should lie. She was given a small room in the officers' quarters, with a guard posted outside for her protection. A trunk of clothing had been found, cast-offs from officers' wives, and she was expected to dress properly for dinner in the mess hall. Sarah stared at the corset and heavy skirts laid out on the bed. After weeks of freedom in simple deerskin, the thought of binding herself back into civilization's constraints made her feel slightly ill. But she donned the uncomfortable garments. Understanding it was a test of sorts. Dinner was an ordeal. The officers and their wives were polite but distant, treating her like some exotic creature that might bite if provoked. She could hear the whispers, see the speculative looks. Living with savages for all that time. She actually fought against our soldiers. No telling what really happened to her. Sarah ate mechanically, the rich food sitting heavy in her stomach after weeks of simple fare. All she could think about was Naichi and the others. Locked in the guardhouse. Were they being fed? Beaten? Would they even survive to stand trial? After dinner, she escaped to the fort's walls, needing air. The guard followed at a discreet distance, but she ignored him, looking out over the darkening desert. Somewhere out there, the survivors of the band were making new camps, mourning their dead, wondering if they'd ever see their captured family members again. Mrs. Mitchell? She turned to find a young lieutenant, barely out of West Point by the look of him. He fidgeted nervously with his hat. Yes? I'm Lieutenant Morrison. Ma'am, Captain Morrison was my older brother. Sarah's heart sank. Of course, the world was never so large as it seemed. I'm sorry for your loss, she said quietly. He looked surprised. You are, even though he was trying to kill me. The warrior who shot him saved my life, but he was still your brother, and losing family is always painful. The lieutenant studied her in the fading light. They say you've lost your mind, gone native, but you don't sound mad to me. What do I sound like? Sad, he said simply, and maybe a little lost. Sarah turned back to the desert view. Your brother, was he related to Samuel Morrison of Willow Creek? Our cousin, ma'am. Why do you— Oh, understanding dawned on his face. Your husband. I heard about that. Sam always was a greedy bastard, begging your pardon. Your brother died because I was there. Sarah said, if I'd stayed hidden, if I hadn't tried to help. He died because we're at war, Lieutenant Morrison interrupted. Because we're trying to force people off land they've held for generations. And they're fighting back. Don't reckon that's your fault, ma'am. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Then he asked, "The Apache who killed him, is he among the prisoners?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I should hate him." The lieutenant mused. "But mostly I'm just tired of all the killing. When does it end?" "When one side is dead or broken," Sarah said bleakly. "That's how wars always end." As if to underscore her words, a commotion arose from the direction of the guardhouse. Soldiers were running, shouting orders. Sarah's heart clenched with fear. "Stay here," Lieutenant Morrison ordered, then ran toward the disturbance. But Sarah couldn't stay. She followed, her heavy skirts hampering her movement. By the time she reached the guardhouse, a crowd had gathered. Through gaps in the soldiers, she could see what had caused the alarm. One of the Apache warriors had managed to hang himself with his own chains. His body swayed gently in the evening breeze, face purple and distorted. Sarah recognized him, a young man named Nitis, who just celebrated the birth of his first child before the raid. "Cut him down," the sergeant was ordering, "and double-check the rest. No more of this." Sarah pushed forward desperately. "Where's Naichi, the tall one who spoke English?" A soldier blocked her path. "Ma'am, you can't be here. Please, just tell me if he's... "He's alive," the soldier said, not unkindly. "Raised hell when we found this one. Had to put him in solitary. Now please, ma'am, you need to go." Relief made her knees weak, but she let herself be led away. Alive. He was alive. For now. That night, lying in the too-soft bed. Sarah stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She couldn't save them all. But maybe, just maybe, she could save one. The warrior who'd saved her life more times than she could count. Tomorrow, she would have to be clever. Tomorrow, she would have to remember how to play the game of civilization. Use whatever influence her status as a white woman gave her. Tomorrow, she would begin fighting a different kind of battle. But tonight, she pressed her face into the pillow and wept. For Nitis, who would never see his child grow up. For Dakea, who died defending his people. For Alma, whose fierce protectiveness couldn't save everyone. For Yellowhair and Moonface, who were gone forever. And for herself and Naichi, caught between two worlds that seemed determined to tear them apart. The abandoned settler's cabin sat in a valley 3 days' ride from Fort Defiance, its roof partially caved in and walls weathered silver by years of sun and wind. Sarah had remembered it from her journey. Thomas had marked it on one of his survey maps as a failed homestead, the family driven out by drought and Apache raids. Now it would be their refuge, if they survived long enough to reach it. "This is madness," Lieutenant Morrison said for the 10th time, even as he helped her load supplies onto the pack horses. "If they catch us, they won't," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "The patrol schedule you provided will get us past the sentries. After that, we just have to stay ahead of pursuit." It had taken 2 weeks of careful planning. 2 weeks of playing the traumatized widow during the day while sneaking around at night, gathering information, stealing supplies, winning over the young lieutenant with her story. She'd told him everything about Thomas's murder, about how the Apache had saved her, about Naichi's losses. Morrison, disillusioned by his brother's death and the endless cycle of violence, had eventually agreed to help. "He's in solitary," Morrison reported, returning from his final check. "Has been since Nitis died. They're planning to ship him to Florida with the others next week, if he lives that long. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. Sarah's heart clenched. The Apache prisoners were being sent to detention camps in Florida, where the humid climate and foreign diseases would kill them more efficiently than bullets ever could. She'd heard the soldiers joking about it, how the Apache problem would solve itself in those swampy prisons. "Then we go tonight," she decided. Morrison had arranged for the guard rotation to leave a brief window at the back of the guardhouse. Sarah waited in the shadows, her heart hammering so loud she was sure it would give them away. She'd traded her cumbersome dress for men's clothing shirt, trousers, and boots that actually fit. Her hair was pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. When Morrison appeared and gave the signal, she darted across the open ground to the guardhouse wall. He'd already loosened the bars on one window. Together, they pried them free, the metal groaning softly. "Naiche," she whispered into the darkness. "Naichi, it's Sarah." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, weakly, "Sarah, you should not be here. I'm getting you out. Can you reach the window?" She heard movement, chains clanking. Then his face appeared in the opening, gaunt and bruised, but alive. His eyes widened when he saw her dressed as a man. "You are crazy, woman," he said, but there was wonder in his voice. Morrison passed through the tools, a file for the chains, a knife, some food and water. 5 minutes, he warned. "Then the patrol comes around." Sarah reached through the bars to touch Naichi's face. "Eat something while you work on the chains. You'll need strength to ride." He caught her hand, pressing it to his cracked lips. "Why you do this? Risk everything?" "Because you saved my life. Because they'll kill you if you stay. Because—" She swallowed hard. "Because I can't bear to lose anyone else I care about." His eyes searched hers in the darkness. Then he nodded and began filing at his chains with desperate efficiency. It took longer than 5 minutes. Morrison had to distract the returning patrol with a story about hearing noises near the stable. By the time Naichi squeezed through the window, his wrists bloodied from pulling against the partially cut chains. Sarah was trembling with fear. They ran for the horses Morrison had hidden in an arroyo behind the fort. Naichi stumbled, weak from days without food, and Sarah caught him around the waist. "I've got you," she murmured, "just a little farther." Morrison was waiting with 3 horses and packed supplies. "This is where we part ways," he said. "I'll raise the alarm in an hour. Give you as much head start as I can. After that, you never saw us." Sarah finished. "Thank you for everything." The young officer touched his hat. "Maybe when this war is over, we'll meet again under better circumstances." He looked at Naichi. "Take care of her, warrior. She's risking everything for you." Naichi straightened despite his weakness. "With my life," he promised. They rode hard through the night, following deer trails and creek beds to hide their tracks. Naichi swayed in the saddle, and Sarah had to reach over several times to steady him. When dawn broke, they were in the high country, surrounded by pines and aspens turning gold with autumn. "Need to rest," Sarah said, guiding them to a sheltered grove. "And you need food." She helped him down from his horse, spreading blankets in a sunny spot. He collapsed gratefully, closing his eyes as she tended his wrists, cleaning and binding the wounds left by the shackles. "Here." She pressed jerky and hardtack into his hands. "Eat slowly," he obeyed, taking small bites and washing them down with water. Color began returning to his face, though the bruises stood out starkly against his skin. "They will hunt us," he said, "both Apache and white soldiers. We are outcasts now, belonging nowhere. Then we'll make our own place," Sarah said firmly. Thomas marked an abandoned cabin on his maps. "It's isolated, defensible. We can survive there until we figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" he repeated softly. "You gave up your world for me. That world gave me up first." She busied herself checking their supplies, not wanting him to see the emotion on her face. "Besides, you taught me to survive. Time to put those lessons to use." They rested until noon, then pressed on. By the second day, Naichi was stronger, able to help when they had to hide their trail or scout for pursuit. They saw cavalry patrols twice in the distance, but managed to avoid them by staying to the rough country. On the 3rd night, camped by a hidden spring, the tension that had been building between them finally broke. They'd finished a meager meal of rabbit Sarah had snared, sitting close to share warmth as mountain temperatures dropped. The fire painted Naichi's features in gold and shadow, and Sarah found herself studying the strong lines of his face, the grace in his movements despite his recent ordeal. "You watch me," he said, not looking at her. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. No. He turned to face her. I watch you too. Have watched since first day. Even when I tried not to. You were supposed to be enemy. We're supposed to be weak, worthless. Instead. Instead? He reached out, fingers ghosting along her cheek. Instead, you are strongest woman I know. Brave like warrior. Kind like morning rain. Beautiful like. Sarah stopped his words by leaning in and kissing him. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him, and gentleness gave way to desperate need when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Sarah saw her own fears reflected in his eyes. This is dangerous, he said. My people will call me traitor. Yours will call you worse. I don't care what they call me. She took his face in her hands. I've lost everything that mattered to their world. You're what matters to mine now. He made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between pain and joy, and kissed her again. This time, there was no hesitation. The blankets were spread beside the fire, and they came together with a hunger born of danger and loneliness and unexpected love. Later, wrapped in each other's arms with the stars wheeling overhead, Naichi whispered Apache words against her hair. What does that mean? She asked sleepily. It means, you are my heart's home. Something my father said to my mother. His arms tightened around her. Never thought I would say those words again. Sarah turned in his embrace, seeing vulnerability in the warrior's eyes. Say you're mine forever, she whispered, echoing words she'd heard him murmur in dreams. His breath caught. Those were words I said to Yellow Hair when we married. How did you... You talk in your sleep sometimes, when nightmares come. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, if I say those words to you, it means everything. Means I choose you above all others, above tribe and tradition. Means we are bound until death, no matter what comes. Can you accept that weight? Sarah thought of all she'd left behind, all she'd chosen to embrace. The proper widow Mitchell would have been horrified. But that woman had died somewhere between Willow Creek and here. The woman who remained understood that love was worth any risk, any sacrifice. I accept, she said simply. He rolled them so she was beneath him, his eyes intense in the firelight. In Apache, then in English, he spoke. You are mine forever, my heart, my life, my chosen one. This I swear by earth and sky. And you are mine. Sarah responded. Forever, no matter what comes. They sealed the vow without words, bodies speaking promises their mouths couldn't fully express. The next morning brought rain, forcing them to travel slowly through muddy trails. But nothing could dampen Sarah's spirits. The weight of Naichi's promise, the memory of his touch, made every hardship bearable. They reached the abandoned cabin as the sun broke through the clouds, painting raindrops like diamonds on the pine needles. It was as desolate as Thomas's notes had suggested. Roof partially collapsed, door hanging on one hinge, weeds growing through gaps in the floor. Home, Sarah said wryly. Naichi dismounted and scouted the perimeter with professional efficiency, checking for signs of recent visitors. No one for many seasons, he reported. Good water from spring, deer trails nearby, can defend if needed. He looked at the dilapidated structure. Much work to make livable. Then we'd better get started. They worked through the afternoon, clearing debris and assessing what could be salvaged. The stone chimney was intact, and 3 of the 4 walls were solid. With effort, they could repair the roof and make it weather-tight before winter. As the sun set on their first day in the valley, they sat on the cabin's broken steps, sharing water and looking out at the wilderness that would be their refuge. Regrets? Naichi asked. Sarah considered. Somewhere, her former neighbors were probably gossiping about her disappearance. The army was certainly hunting them. They were outlaws now, with no legal standing in either world. Winter was coming, and they had minimal supplies and a broken shelter. None, she said, meaning it. You! He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Only that I did not find you sooner. That yellow hair and moonface could not know you. They would have loved your fierce spirit. Tell me about them, Sarah said. Not the pain of losing them, but the joy of having them. Help me know them through your memories. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Naichi spoke of happier times, his daughter's first steps, how she would toddle after him demanding to be carried. Yellowhair's skill at beadwork, the way she laughed at his attempts to sing, the life they'd built together before violence tore it away. Sarah shared her own memories, teaching Thomas to bake bread, the garden they'd planned but never planted, quiet evenings reading by lamplight, the simple dreams that had seemed so ordinary until they were gone. We honor them by living, Naichi said finally, by building new dreams on the ashes of old ones. Together, Sarah added. Together. He agreed. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by its pack. The sound no longer frightened Sarah. She understood now. They were calling to their family, confirming bonds that helped them survive in a harsh world. She and Naichi were like those coyotes now, outcasts from their original packs, but bonded to each other with ties stronger than blood or tradition. Tomorrow would bring challenges, fixing the cabin, gathering food for winter, staying hidden from those who hunted them. But tonight, they had shelter, they had each other, and they had love forged in the crucible of loss and tested by sacrifice. It was more than many ever found, and it was enough. As they prepared their bedroll in the corner of the cabin that still had a roof, Naichi caught Sarah's hand. No fear? No doubt? He asked. She thought of the proper life she'd abandoned, the safety of conformity she'd rejected. Then she looked at this man who'd lost everything but still found room in his heart for her, who'd taught her strength she didn't know she possessed. Fear? Always. Fear keeps us alive. Doubt? She shook her head. Never. Not about this. Not about us. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his warrior's face into something younger, almost boyish. My brave Sarah, my heart's home. They came together in the darkness of their broken shelter, two damaged souls building something new from the ruins of their former lives. Outside, the rain began again, pattering on what remained of the roof, washing the world clean for whatever tomorrow might bring. In the abandoned valley, far from the reach of those who would judge or condemn them, they were simply a man and woman choosing love over fear, hope over hate. And for now, for tonight, that was everything. The first snows of winter had sealed the valley in pristine white when they came. Sarah was checking her trap lines, moving carefully through the drifts in the snowshoes Naichi had taught her to make. The rabbit tracks were fresh, promising meat for their steadily dwindling stores. She'd become proficient at reading the forest's signs these past months, learning to move as quietly as her Apache teacher. The crack of a branch made her freeze. Not the random break of snow weight, but the deliberate sound of a footstep. She eased behind a thick pine, hand moving to the knife at her belt. Mrs. Mitchell? Sarah Mitchell. The voice was unfamiliar, cautious. Sarah peered around the tree to see a lone man on horseback, his coat collar turned up against the cold. He was older, perhaps 50, with the weathered look of a career frontier lawman. A badge glinted on his chest. You, Marshal. Mrs. Mitchell, I know you're out there. He called again. I'm Marshal Wade Thompson. I'm alone, and I'm not here to arrest you. Just want to talk. Sarah remained hidden, mind racing. How had he found them? Their valley was miles from any trail, protected by difficult terrain and winter weather. Your friend Lieutenant Morrison sent me. Thompson continued. Took him dying of fever to finally tell someone the truth. Said I might be the one lawman who'd listen to your side of things. Morrison, kind, idealistic Morrison. Sarah felt a pang of grief for the young officer who'd risked everything to help them. I'm putting my gun on the ground, Thompson said, suiting action to words. Like I said, just want to talk. Sarah emerged slowly, knife still in hand. Talk about what? Marshal? Thompson's eyes took in her appearance, the buckskin dress, the sun-darkened skin, the wary stance of someone who'd learned to survive outside civilization's boundaries. About choices, Mrs. Mitchell, about consequences, about whether there might be a way forward that doesn't end with more blood. "There's a cabin about a mile east," Sarah said finally. "You can say your piece there." She led him through the forest, alert for any sign of additional riders. But Thompson seemed to be alone as promised, his horse struggling through the deeper drifts. At the rise overlooking their valley, Sarah gave a whistled signal, 3 notes that would tell Nietzsche a stranger was coming, but she was in control. The cabin had been transformed over the months. The roof was solid now, chinked tight against the weather. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the smell of venison stew drifted on the cold air. It looked like what it was, a home carved out of wilderness by determination and love. Nietzsche emerged as they approached, rifle casual in his hands but ready. His eyes assessed Thompson with the calculating gaze of a warrior, taking in the badge, the empty holster, the careful way the lawman moved. "Marshal Thompson," Sarah said. "This is my husband, Nietzsche." If Thompson was surprised by her use of the word husband, he didn't show it. He touched his hat respectfully. "Sir, I appreciate you not shooting me on sight." "Day is young," Nietzsche replied, but he lowered the rifle slightly. Inside, Sarah served coffee, real coffee, their last precious supply, while Thompson warmed himself by the fire. The cabin's single room was sparse but clean, with herbs hanging from the rafters and shelves holding preserved foods. A bed of pine boughs and blankets occupied one corner, while Nietzsche's weapons decorated the walls alongside Sarah's few remaining books. "Cozy," Thompson observed. "You've done well for yourselves out here?" "Say what you came to say," Nietzsche commanded, sitting protectively close to Sarah. Thompson sipped his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "First off, Morrison lived long enough to write out a full statement about how you two met, about the rescue from those bandits, about why he helped you escape. Judge Harlan in Santa Fe found it mighty interesting reading. And," Sarah prompted, "and it seems Samuel Morrison, the captain's cousin, the one who killed your husband, met with an unfortunate accident last month. Fell off his horse in a canyon, broke his neck. Funny thing is, 3 different witnesses suddenly remembered seeing him shoot Thomas Mitchell in the back. Conscience is a powerful thing when a man's dead and can't threaten you anymore." Sarah's hands trembled. After all this time, an admission of Thomas's murder. It changed nothing and everything at once. "There's more," Thompson continued. "The Apache that surrendered at Fort Defiance, the women and children, they were supposed to be sent to Florida. But there's a new Indian agent, man named Jeffords. He's been arguing for a different approach. Says if the Apache had somewhere to go, somewhere they could live in peace, maybe the raids would stop." Nietzsche's face was stone. "We have heard such promises before. Always lies." "Maybe, but Jeffords is different. He's actually friends with Cochise, and he's got the backing of some powerful folks in Washington who are tired of the cost of this war." Thompson set down his cup. "Here's the thing. They're setting aside a section of land, not prime land. Mind you, rough country that nobody else wants, but it would be Apache land, governed by Apache law." "A cage is still a cage," Nietzsche said bitterly. "True, but it's better than Florida. Better than being hunted to extinction." Thompson looked between them. "The women and children from your band are being offered passage there. Some of the warriors, too, if they agree to keep the peace. Jeffords asked me to find you, specifically. Nietzsche said you were a man of influence, that others would follow your lead." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why would they want him after he killed soldiers?" Thompson smiled grimly. "Because they're finally starting to understand that killing all the Apache isn't possible. Too expensive, too bloody, and, frankly, too many folks back east are starting to question the morality of it. They need Apache leaders who can bridge both worlds. A warrior who speaks English, who understands white ways but commands respect among his people. That's valuable." "And Sarah," Nietzsche's arm went around her protectively. "What of her?" "Well, that's complicated. Technically, She's wanted for aiding escape of a federal prisoner and assault on Army personnel. But Morrison's statement muddies things considerably. And if she were married to an Apache leader who was helping keep the peace? He shrugged. Might be folks would be willing to look the other way. Sarah laughed bitterly. Married. No white preacher would perform such a ceremony. No, but Apache custom would be recognized on Apache land. And there's precedent white women who've married into the tribes and been accepted. Thompson stood, moving to the window to look out at the snow-covered valley. It's not an easy path I'm offering. You'd be caught between two worlds forever. White society would never fully accept you back. Sarah. And Naichi, many Apache would see you as a sellout, making deals with the enemy. We're already caught between worlds, Sarah said quietly. At least this way, we might help others find peace. Naichi was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes seeing beyond the cabin walls to possibilities and dangers Sarah could only imagine. Finally, he spoke. These women and children being held, Itza is among them? And the boy who lost his father? I have a list. Thompson pulled out a paper. Itza, yes, boy named Nayeli, about 30 others. My husband's sister, Naichi murmured. And children who deserve better than prison camps. He looked at Sarah. What does your heart say? Sarah thought of their peaceful valley, the simple life they'd built together. It would be so easy to say no, to hide here until the world forgot them. But she also thought of Itza's kindness, of children growing up in captivity, of the endless cycle of violence that would continue without someone willing to take the first step toward peace. I think, she said slowly, that we've been given a chance to honor our dead by protecting the living. Thomas believed in justice, in doing what's right even when it's dangerous. Yellowhair and Moonface would want their people's children to have a future. Naichi nodded slowly. And hiding here. We help no one but ourselves. Thompson turned from the window. I won't lie to you. It'll be hard. There'll be those on both sides who'll hate you for trying to build bridges. You'll face suspicion, hostility, maybe violence, but you'll also be giving folks a chance at something better than endless war. When? Naichi asked. I can give you 3 days to think it over. Then I need to head back with your answer. If it's yes, we'll work out the details of getting you safely to the new territory. If it's no, he spread his hands. Well, I got lost in a snowstorm and never found you. After Thompson left, promising to return in 3 days. Sarah and Naichi sat by the fire in contemplative silence. The life they'd built here was precarious, but theirs. What Thompson offered was uncertainty on a grand scale. I will follow your lead. Sarah said finally, whatever you decide. Naichi pulled her close. No, we decide together, always together. He stared into the flames. Part of me wants to stay here, hide from the world, keep you safe in our valley forever, but another part remembers you're a leader. Sarah finished. That people look to you for guidance. I led them to disaster before. What if I fail them again? Sarah took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Then we fail together, but at least we try. Isn't that better than hiding while others suffer? That night, they made love with desperate intensity, as if trying to hold on to something that might slip away. Outside, snow began falling again, blanketing the valley in fresh white that covered all tracks and traces, making the world new. For 3 days they talked, planned, worried. They prepared the cabin in case they never returned, caching supplies and leaving signs for any Apache who might need shelter. They also prepared themselves for the possibility that Thompson's offer was a trap, that they would be separated or imprisoned despite promises. When the marshal returned, they were ready with their answer. We'll come, Naichi said simply, but with conditions. Thompson listened as they outlined their requirements. Safe passage for all the women and children. No forced separation of families. Guarantee that Apache law would govern Apache land. Some he could promise, others he could only pledge to fight for. It's a start, he said finally. More than anyone's been willing to offer before. As they prepared to leave their valley, Sarah took one last look around the cabin that had sheltered their love through its fragile beginning. Every corner held memories. Their first night together as the roof leaked rain. The morning Naichi had taught her to make pemmican. The evening they danced to no music but their own humming. "Regrets?" Naichi asked, echoing his question from months before. "Never," Sarah replied, as she had then. "Only hope." They rode out as snow began falling again, covering their tracks as if they'd never been there at all. But they carried with them something that couldn't be erased, a love that had bridged two worlds and might, just might, help others do the same. Behind them, the cabin waited in its hidden valley, a testament to what two people could build together when the world gave them no choice but to forge their own path. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the hard work of peace, but they rode toward it together, and that made all the difference. The town of Willow Creek hadn't changed much in the months Sarah had been gone. The same dusty Main Street, the same cluster of buildings around the well, the same faces that turned to stare as Marshall Thompson's small party rode in. But now those faces showed shock, scandal, and disgust rather than mere suspicion. Sarah rode beside Naichi, her chin high despite the whispers that followed them like dust devils. She wore her buckskin dress with pride now, her hair braided in the Apache style. Let them stare. She was no longer the grieving widow seeking their approval. "That's her," she heard Mrs. Henderson hiss to her companion. "The Mitchell widow, living with savages like a common." "Courage," Naichi murmured in Apache. He rode with the controlled grace of a warrior, seemingly untouched by the hostile stares and muttered curses. But Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stayed near his knife. They'd stopped here on the way to the new Apache territory, Thompson insisting they needed supplies and fresh horses. Sarah suspected he also wanted to test how they'd handle hostile civilization before throwing them into the larger challenges ahead. At the general store, Mr. Paulson's face went white when Sarah entered. "We don't serve Indians here," he stammered, looking past her to Naichi. "Then it's fortunate I'm not asking you to," Sarah replied coolly. "I'm here to collect my husband's surveying instruments, the ones Thomas left in your care. You can't, that is..." Paulson's eyes darted between them. "You're married? To him? By Apache custom?" "Yes. Now, about those instruments." "Apache custom." Paulson spat the words like they tasted foul. "You've fallen far. Sarah Mitchell, your husband must be rolling in his grave." Sarah stepped forward, and something in her eyes made the shopkeeper step back. "My husband was murdered by Samuel Morrison, while you and the rest of this town look the other way. Don't you dare invoke his name to me." Thompson intervened before things could escalate. "The lady's asking for her lawful property. Paulson, I suggest you fetch it." Grumbling, the shopkeeper disappeared into his back room. While they waited, Sarah became aware of a crowd gathering outside. The whispers grew louder. Uglier. Someone shouted about Apache lovers and race traitors. Naichi touched her arm. "We should go." "Not without Thomas's things." Those instruments were all she had left of him besides memories. She wouldn't let fear drive her away empty-handed. Paulson returned with a leather case, practically throwing it across the counter. Sarah checked the contents: compass, theodolite, chains, field notes in Thomas's careful hand. All there. As they turned to leave, the door burst open. Samuel Morrison's widow stood there, her face twisted with rage. Behind her, a group of townsmen looked ready for violence. "You!" Isabel Morrison pointed a shaking finger at Naichi. "You killed my husband's cousin, and you..." Her gaze swung to Sarah. "You helped him escape justice." "Your husband murdered mine," Sarah said quietly. Where was justice then? "Liar. Samuel was a good man. He'd never..." "He shot Thomas in the back over water rights," Sarah interrupted. "3 witnesses have now sworn to it. Your good man was a murderer and a thief." Isabel's face went purple. "How dare you? Standing there with your savage, wearing their heathen clothes. You're a disgrace to your race." "Enough." Thompson stepped between them, hand on his pistol. "Everyone calm down." But Isabel wasn't finished. They should hang you both, string you up like the animals you are." The crowd murmured agreement. Pressing closer, Sarah could feel Naichi coiling beside her, ready to fight. This could turn into a bloodbath in seconds. Then a clear voice cut through the mob mentality. "Let them pass." Sarah turned to see Reverend Walsh pushing through the crowd. The elderly minister had always been kind to her, one of the few who had offered genuine condolences after Thomas's death. "This is still a civilized town," Walsh continued, his mild tone carrying surprising authority. "We don't mob people in the street, no matter our feelings about their choices. She's betrayed everything decent," someone shouted. Walsh looked at Sarah with sad but understanding eyes. Perhaps she's found her own path to peace after terrible loss. Either way, violence solves nothing. He addressed the crowd. "Go about your business. Let the marshal do his job." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. Isabel shot Sarah one last venomous look before stalking away. Thompson hustled them to their horses, clearly eager to leave before tempers flared again. As they rode out, Sarah looked back once at the town that had been her home. Reverend Walsh stood on the church steps, watching. He raised his hand in what might have been farewell or blessing. "That was foolish," Naichi said once they were clear of town. "Coming here, facing them." "I needed to," Sarah replied. "To see that I made the right choice. That world," she gestured back toward Willow Creek, "was killing me slowly. With you, at least I'm alive." They camped that night by a stream, the tension of the day slowly easing. Thompson had procured supplies despite the hostility, and they ate better than they had in weeks. As Sarah cleaned Thomas's instruments by firelight, she found his final survey notes. "Look," she showed Naichi. "He mapped this whole region, every water source, every trail." A thought struck her. "This could help your people. Knowing where the good water is, the protected valleys." Naichi studied the detailed maps with growing interest. "You're Thomas. He saw the land truly, not just as something to own, but as it is." He traced a route with his finger. "This canyon here, it's where we wintered when I was young. And this spring, hidden unless you know where to look, he found them all. He loved the land," Sarah said softly. "Just wanted everyone to share it fairly." "Noble fool," Naichi said, but with affection, "like someone else I know." Thompson rejoined them, having been scouting ahead. 2 days to Fort Grant. That's where the delegation is gathering. "Sarah, I should warn you, you won't be the only white woman there who's chosen this path. Some have been with the Apache for years. They might not welcome you warmly either." "I'm getting used to not being welcomed," Sarah said dryly. The next day's travel took them through increasingly rough country. Sarah noticed a Apache sign that Naichi had taught her: bent twigs, stones arranged in patterns. They were being watched, tracked. Naichi whistled a complex melody, and the feeling of being stalked faded. "Friends?" Thompson asked. "Scouts. They know we come in peace now." Naichi looked troubled. "But they watch you closely. Marshal, trust is thin." That night, 3 Apache warriors materialized from the darkness at their camp. Sarah recognized one, Closen, who'd argued for killing her that first night. His face was hard as he spoke rapidly to Naichi in Apache. "What's he saying?" Thompson asked nervously. "He says many think I am fool to trust white promises again. Says I bring shame by taking white woman as wife." Naichi's jaw tightened. "Says Yellowhair's spirit weeps to see me betray our people." The cruel words hit their mark. Sarah saw pain flash across Naichi's face before he controlled it. He responded in measured tones, his voice carrying quiet authority. "I told him Yellowhair understood love better than hate, that she would want Apache children to have chance at life, not glorious death." He met Closen's stare. "And that my choice of wife dishonors no one." Closen spat at the ground near Sarah's feet. A deliberate insult. Naichi was on his feet instantly, hand on his knife. The 2 warriors faced each other, violence crackling between them. "Stop," Sarah said in the Apache she'd learned. I am not your enemy. I would learn your ways. Help your people if you let me. Closen laughed harshly. White woman speaks like child, knows nothing of Apache way. Then teach me, Sarah challenged. Or are you afraid I might actually learn? The warrior's eyes narrowed. Without warning, he drew his knife and threw it. The blade thunked into a tree trunk inches from Sarah's head. She didn't flinch. First lesson. Closen said, Apache woman knows death walks always beside her. You are soft, weak. You will fail. He retrieved his knife and melted back into the darkness with his companions. Naichi pulled Sarah close, checking her for injury. That was brave, he said, also very stupid. I'm learning the difference is often small, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thompson whistled low. Lady, you've got steel in you. But Closen's not wrong about the challenges ahead. The Apache women who've lived this life since birth, they won't make it easy on you. Nothing's been easy since Thomas died. Sarah said, I don't expect that to change now. They reached Fort Grant as the sun set on the second day. The fort was a confusion of activity. Apache bands arriving under military escort. Officials from Washington in their city suits looking overwhelmed. Interpreters rushing between groups trying to keep peace. In a fenced area, Sarah saw the women and children from Naichi's band. Her heart leapt when she spotted Itza, thinner but alive. The young woman's face lit up when she saw them, though she couldn't approach with guards watching. Tomorrow, Thompson promised. The council meets tomorrow to finalize terms, then families can reunite. They were assigned a tent on the edge of the Apache camp. As word spread of Naichi's presence, people began arriving, some to welcome him, others to challenge his decisions. Sarah sat quietly, understanding perhaps one word in 10, watching the complex dynamics play out. An elderly woman approached as night fell. She studied Sarah with sharp eyes, then spoke at length to Naichi. His responses were respectful but firm. Finally, the woman reached out and touched Sarah's face, her weathered fingers surprisingly gentle. She is Dakea's mother, Naichi explained. She asks if you are worth her son's death. I told her you tried to save Apache lives in the fight, that you have earned your place among us through suffering and courage. What did she say? She says she will watch and judge for herself. He paused. It's more than I hoped. She could have demanded blood debt. As they prepared for sleep, the weight of the coming day pressed upon them. Tomorrow, the council would meet. Leaders from both sides would argue, negotiate, possibly fight. The fate of hundreds hung in the balance. Are you ready for this? Sarah asked. Naichi pulled her close. No, but we go forward anyway. Together. Together. Sarah agreed. Outside their tent, they could hear the mingled sounds of two worlds trying to find common ground. Apache songs mixing with cavalry bugles. Children playing despite the guards. Arguments in multiple languages. It was chaotic, tense, uncertain, but it was also hope. Fragile, dangerous hope. But hope nonetheless. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah thought of that moment in Willow Creek when Isabel Morrison had called for their blood. How easy it would be to let hate win, to continue the cycle of vengeance and loss. But she and Naichi had chosen a harder path, trying to build bridges between worlds that wanted to remain forever apart. Tomorrow would test whether those bridges could hold weight or would collapse, taking everyone down with them. But tonight, wrapped in Naichi's arms with the stars visible through the tent flap, Sarah allowed herself to believe they might succeed. The Apache word for hope, Naichi had taught her, also meant dawn coming. As she drifted off, Sarah held tight to that image. Darkness giving way to light, the possibility of a new day for all of them. Whether that dawn would bring peace or more bloodshed remained to be seen, but at least they would face it together. Two people who'd found love in the midst of loss, ready to fight for a future neither of their peoples might accept, but both desperately needed. The new settlement sprawled across a valley between red mesas, neither fully Apache nor fully American, but something in between. Canvas tents mixed with traditional wickiups. Cooking fires sent up smoke in neat military rows. and children played under the watchful eyes of both Apache mothers and Army guards. Sarah knelt by their small fire, grinding corn in the way Itza had taught her. 6 months had passed since the treaty signing. 6 months of building this fragile experiment in coexistence. Her hands, once soft from a life of domestic comfort, were now calloused and strong, marked by the daily work of survival. "You're getting better," Itza observed, sitting down beside her. The young woman had become her closest friend, teaching her not just Apache skills, but the subtle ways of navigating between two cultures. "Almost can't tell you're white when you work like that." "Almost?" Sarah smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "Well, you still apologize too much. Apache woman knows her worth. Doesn't say sorry for taking up space." Itza's expression grew serious. "You'll need that strength today." Today. The delegation from Washington was returning, this time with a new Indian agent and, more troubling, a congressional committee investigating irregularities in the treaty implementation. Sarah knew what that meant. Someone back east had decided there was too much freedom here, too much Apache autonomy. Naichi emerged from their shelter, and Sarah's heart still skipped at the sight of him. He wore a mixture of traditional clothing and American additions, a concession to his role as liaison between the worlds. The past months had been hard on him. Caught between Apache, who thought he'd given away too much, and whites, who thought he'd gained too much. "They're here," he said simply. The delegation was everything Sarah had feared, led by a senator named Harrison Blackwood. They radiated disapproval from the moment they entered the settlement. Blackwood's gaze lingered on the Apache children learning English letters alongside their own language, on the warriors still carrying weapons, on the white women who'd chosen to stay with their Apache families. "This is not what Congress envisioned," Blackwood declared at the opening council. "We expected civilizing influences, not this mixing of savage and civilized ways." Tom Jeffords, the Indian agent who'd fought for this compromise, stood firm. "With respect, Senator, what you see is peace. No raids in 6 months, no soldiers killed, no settlements burned. Isn't that what Congress wanted? Peace, yes, but not at the cost of proper Christian civilization." Blackwood's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. "I see we have white women living in sin with these heathens. This is intolerable." Sarah felt Naichi tense beside her, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. They'd known this was coming. The fragile peace they'd built was too threatening to those who profited from war and division. Over the next days, the committee conducted interviews, their questions growing increasingly hostile. They were particularly fixated on the white women who'd married Apache men, seeing them as symbols of moral decay rather than bridges between cultures. Sarah's turn came on the 3rd day. She dressed carefully, not in full Apache attire, which would provoke, nor in Eastern fashion, which would seem like capitulation. Instead, she chose a simple dress she'd made herself, incorporating both traditions. "State your name for the record," Blackwood commanded. "Sarah Mitchell, also known as Sarah Naichi, wife of the Apache leader Naichi." "Wife." Blackwood's voice dripped contempt. "By what authority? What Christian minister blessed this union?" "By Apache custom and law, recognized on Apache land as guaranteed by treaty. Treaties can be revised, Mrs. Mitchell, especially when they enable immorality." He leaned forward. "You were a respectable widow. What possessed you to degrade yourself this way?" Sarah thought of all the possible answers. Love, survival, the failure of respectable society to protect her. "Instead," she said, "I found a man of honor who saved my life and showed me a different way to live. I found a community that judges people by their actions, not their skin color. I found hope after loss. If that's degradation, Senator, then your definition needs examining. You dare lecture me on morality while living in adultery with a savage? I dare speak truth to anyone who needs to hear it," Sarah replied calmly. "And if you use that word again to describe my husband or his people, this interview is over." Blackwood's face reddened. "You forget yourself, woman. You have no power here. Neither do you. Senator, not on Apache land. That's what frightens you, isn't it? that they don't need your approval to exist. The interview deteriorated from there, but Sarah had made her point. She wasn't a helpless victim to be saved, but a woman who'd chosen her path with open eyes. That night, the settlement buzzed with tension. Word had spread that Blackwood was recommending drastic changes, disarming the Apache men, sending children to distant boarding schools, forbidding traditional practices. Everything they'd fought to preserve would be stripped away. "We should run," Sarah suggested as she and Naichi lay together in the darkness. "Go back to our valley, live free, and abandon the others? Let them face this alone." Naichi shook his head. "No, we stand and fight, but with words now, not weapons." The next morning brought unexpected allies. A group of local ranchers arrived, led by a man named Jim Patterson, no relation to the fort commander, just another common frontier name. Sarah recognized some faces from Willow Creek, though they wouldn't meet her eyes. "Senator," Patterson addressed Blackwood, "we've come to speak our piece about this situation." Blackwood looked pleased, clearly expecting support. "Of course, Mr. Patterson. I'm sure you have concerns about Apache warriors so close to your properties." "Actually, sir, we've come to say the opposite." Patterson removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Since this treaty, we haven't lost a single head of cattle to raids. Our family sleeps safe. Trade has opened up. Apache bring herbs and hides we can't get elsewhere. This peace is good for everyone." "You support this arrangement?" Blackwood sounded genuinely shocked. "We support what works, Senator, and this works better than 20 years of fighting ever did." One by one, other ranchers spoke up. They told of Apache who'd helped find lost cattle, of trade relationships building, of their children playing together at the settlement's edge. It wasn't all harmony. There was still suspicion, still prejudice, but it was progress. Sarah noticed one woman in the group staring at her. Margaret Walsh, the Reverend's daughter from Willow Creek. Their eyes met, and Margaret stepped forward. "I knew Sarah Mitchell back home," Margaret said. "Thought she'd lost her mind when we heard she'd taken up with the Apache, but seeing her now—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "She looks more alive than she ever did as a proper widow in our town. Maybe we're the ones who were wrong." The testimony continued through the day. Apache leaders spoke of their people's needs and hopes. White traders described profitable partnerships. Even some soldiers admitted the peace had made their jobs easier and safer. But Blackwood remained unmoved. That evening, he announced his recommendations. The settlement would be disbanded, Apache men disarmed, children removed for proper education, and any white women who refused to leave would be arrested for moral turpitude. The uproar was immediate. Apache warriors reached for weapons. Soldiers moved to defensive positions, and violence seemed seconds away. Then Naichi's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" He stood between the two sides, arms outstretched. "This is what they want, for us to prove we're savages who can only solve problems with blood. We're better than that." He turned to Blackwood. "Senator, you have two choices. Accept the peace we've built here, or destroy it and restart a war that will cost hundreds of lives and thousands of dollars. But know this, if you take our children, if you arrest our women, if you break the promises made to us, every Apache will fight to the last breath. Not because we're savages, but because we're human beings protecting our families." Sarah moved to stand beside him. "And we white women who've chosen this life? We won't go quietly either. Arrest us, and you'll have to explain to Eastern newspapers why you're imprisoning American citizens for the crime of marrying men you don't approve of. The scandal might interest voters back home." One by one, others joined them. Apache and white, men and women. Even some of the soldiers who'd come to respect the people they once fought. They stood together in silent defiance of Blackwood's vision of separation and supremacy. Tom Jeffords stepped forward. "Senator, I urge you to reconsider. What you see here isn't perfect, but it's working. Give it time to grow." Blackwood looked at the united front before him, calculating political costs. Finally, he spoke. "I'll reserve my recommendations pending further study. The committee will reconvene in Washington to discuss our findings. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. As Blackwood's delegation departed the next morning, Sarah knew they'd won only a reprieve. The forces that wanted to destroy what they'd built would return, in different forms, with different weapons. But for now, the settlement survived. That evening, they held a celebration. Apache drums mixing with frontier fiddles. Traditional dances performed alongside square dancing. Sarah found herself teaching Margaret Walsh Apache words, while Itza learned the Virginia reel from a soldier's wife. "Look what we've done," Nietzsche said, pulling Sarah aside to a quiet spot where they could observe the mingling cultures. "Not perfect, but ours," Sarah finished. "Worth fighting for." He kissed her then, not caring who saw, and she realized how far they'd both come from that first meeting in a blood-soaked canyon. They'd built something from loss and pain, not just a marriage, but a community. Not just survival, but hope for something better. The next months would bring new challenges. Some Apache would leave, unable to accept the compromises. Some whites would withdraw their support when the novelty wore off. Children would struggle between two worlds, and parents would agonize over which traditions to keep and which to adapt. But tonight, under stars that didn't care about the color of skin beneath them, people who'd been enemies laughed together. Children played without learning hate, and two souls who'd found each other across an impossible divide held tight to love that had already survived so much. "Do you remember?" Sarah asked. "That night you asked me to say I was yours forever?" "Every word." Nietzsche replied, "I'm still yours, forever, no matter what comes. And I am yours, forever, in this world and the next." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah thought of all they'd lost to get here. Thomas, Yellow Hair, Moonface, Dakia, and so many others. But from that loss had grown something new and precious. Not the life any of them had planned, but perhaps the one they were meant to live. The Apache word for dawn also meant hope. And as Sarah looked at the faces around the fires, Apache and white, young and old, all trying to build something better than the world they'd inherited, she felt that dawn approaching. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. And in the end, possible was enough to build a future on. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious, where are you enjoying this tale? Are you listening during your commute, reading at home, or perhaps discovering it somewhere unexpected? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about Sarah and Nietzsche's journey, and where in the world their story has reached you. Your feedback helps create more authentic frontier tales of love, loss, and hope against impossible odds.